The experience of being human has many universal qualities that make it easier to learn together than apart. The purpose of Emotional Warrior Radio is to bring the learning processes one goes through in talk therapy out into the world, so everyone has the opportunity for growth. Come and join us on this journey. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Emotional Warrior Radio. This week, we will explore with Lorna the deeply emotional aspects of what she has come to understand about herself, her family, and Danny's family over time. In this session, we focus on the many ways her hyper-independence and other defense mechanisms have served not just to protect her in the world, but also acted as a shield in her own mind from being able to see clearly her pain and therefore integrate those experiences more fully. So let's begin.
All right, welcome back, Lorna. I wanted to meet again with you because of where you were coming to as far as your understanding of the family and the situation and your boundaries and how they were reacting. That is an important experience to organize, to look back, connect the dots, but there's also more to our personal development when it comes to, what does this mean for us? Where's the silver lining? Where's the personal growth that comes from really actually surviving something like that and wanting to continue to move forward? Or is it, is there something more there? And it felt like there was, and because all instances in life, I think, require or produce in us some amount of, opportunity to really understand ourselves more deeply, even if it's an altercation at the grocery store or a situation. I still think no matter what, we have this opportunity to be able to see into ourselves. So that's what we're going to do today and see where we go with that. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about how you were feeling after the session and like you said, like the things that were coming up and you were mulling over this week?
Yeah, so I liked what you said about it's important to organize the experience and the feelings that are coming up from it. And I know that's something that I've been doing basically since the first attack occurred in regards to this codependent family structure, but just like in general, that's how I function as a human being. I just find myself so overwhelmed by everything from my past that came up. So these old cycles from the past, really came to light after this essential rejection from a family that I wasn't necessarily being drug into that codependency. I mean, they tried to, and I was resisting. And I found myself thinking and saying a lot like, why can't I just be loved for exactly who I am? Mm-hmm. And I that was part of that emotional release that I had a couple of weeks ago, is that I just realized there are very few people in my life that I feel like have loved me without trying to change me. And that's what I feel like I have battled against my entire life, talking about last week's session with the temperament of just being, an independent person and developing a hyper independence as a survival mechanism in these relationships with people. It's like I had to double down on who I was as a person and advocate for that person not to be changed. It's really just it's always been me coming to the table of why can't you accept this as who I am and not try to change that person?
And in what ways? And that's, I think I want to kind of understand too, in what ways people are asking you to change or maybe they're not asking even if they're trying to convince you or tell you is wrong,
Right.
like, and give a little bit more context to that. But just to, emphasize here, it's that there is that after all of the aggression, madness, chaos, underneath it, there is a feeling of real, like, of feeling out of control of a situation of like, wait a second, how am I supposed to feel about this situation? Am I always supposed to be okay? Always supposed to be able to call a spade and go, okay, well, that's clear. And here's my boundary and I'm fine. No, there is something to this. There is something personal that's felt about, you have self-acceptance and you have acceptance for the other, and you're finding it difficult to get that reciprocated.
Yes.
But that comes with hurt feelings. That comes with something that is not easy to manage. And I think this is where how do we reach out for help? How do we manage these feelings when they come up? Because I think there's an isolation that occurs when you start to feel like there's no one around you that wants to do anything other than change you or get you to see things their way. So I wonder if you want to give, us a couple of examples or ways that you've experienced this in the past that have been most difficult.
Yeah. I'm probably going to cry too, because I already felt myself crying when you talked about the isolation and loneliness, because that is something that I have felt a great deal of my life. And just, I'll answer the question in just a moment, but I feel like why this hurts so much with this particular situation is because I began to open myself up to the possibility of, acceptance in this family that was, I took a risk essentially. I wanted to put myself out there. I didn't want to be closed off anymore. And it didn't really work out in my favor. And that really hurt. I think on a grander scale, ways that I felt misperceived and misunderstood, and like when I experienced people's attempts to change me, was just because of the trauma that I've experienced as a child. In my adulthood, I'm hyper aware of my surroundings because I'm always trying to assess what the danger is. And my nervous system just like doesn't recognize that I am safe sometimes, but sometimes it's worked out in ways where I've been able to say, I don't like the situation that we're in, we need to leave. Like even physically removing myself from areas where I'm with people and I'm like, something about this doesn't feel right and I want to leave. And that's happened to me quite frequently throughout my life. And I'm always right. And I don't mean to say that in an egotistical way, but it's like the next day, or even within a few hours, we would find out that something occurred at this gathering that we were at. And had we stayed, we would have been drug into it. But when I'm saying those things of like, something feels wrong, I don't want to be here. And then like, I'm proven right. I'm like, hey, like maybe we should really kind of focus on my intuition next time and maybe trust me more. Like I'm not coming from a place of anxiety necessarily that's misguided. I'm coming from a place of like, my nervous system is signaling to me that there is danger somewhere and I need to listen to it. And I was convinced otherwise. And that's just been a theme throughout my whole life. And so I've learned, or I never stopped listening to my intuition, but I did, confuse anxiety and intuition because there's really no one there that supported that. And so I was always just I was made to feel, crazy for having these kinds of thoughts. And like centrally back to the most recent experience with my brush with codependency and narcissism, I had that intuitive feeling of, this girlfriend is displaying behaviors that make me feel unsafe, and I think that we need to be cautious of them. And even being proven right several times over, I was gaslighted into thinking like I was being irrational.
Yeah, I think that this is a really good point to elaborate on the difference between the experience in the place that you're coming from and where most people are taught to come from as far as their anxiety, how that is shifted over time, right, into something that is problematic, and how intuition is basically, lost for adults in general. But and I don't also want to. I just want to kind of put a mental marker on the risk that you take to be loved. Now, this is all the way back in the beginning, what you said. We must take risks in order to ever experience feelings of love. But because we understand that, we need to assess the person we're taking a risk on in order to most likely be able to tell whether or not that risk is good. And I mean, meaning that it's going to have a good outcome, or it probably won't, because of the dynamics that we're seeing. And that we have to face that disappointment, because this is the thing about wish fulfillment, is in families and intimate relationships, is this hope for repair, that we really this time are going to, be seen, be accepted, and love for who we are. Here it is, and I that generally is why we will risk for that wish. But in reality, if we really take into consideration all the factors we can see with a little time, and I think probably tempering our own desire, without hurting ourselves or experiencing, loss, be able to see that the family doesn't have the capacity, for acceptance, other than unless you're going to be like them. And that's not accepting you.
Right.
That's you drinking the Kool-Aid. So that's different. So, and you're like, that's not love. My wish was somewhere else. But so that's valuable to know, that there is a desire in you for that experience, because you want to make sure that you're giving that you're taking that risk with the right person or the right people.
Right.
But, and here I think to kind of go back to that and then lead off into building up to understanding how we got so wildly thrown off in our own intuition. It's, because anxiety is hardwired, it's into us as either something that we can feel when we perceive. We don't necessarily have to see the bear running at us. We can hear the crackling of something we can't see and feel the anxiety and start to get ready for surviving. Mm-hmm. Same thing internally. We don't have to see somebody, teeth out, acting wild, but we can notice mannerisms and different things about the personality, like you were. And so your anxiety seems to actually be well calibrated. Mm-hmm. And it might be hyper because of something from the past. Maybe you're more aware, but I'm actually considering I think we are dumbed down. Mm-hmm. Meaning that I would say where you're coming from isn't, especially if you've been correct every time, that you can remember doing this, that I would want you on my hunting team, right? But I don't want all those other people who've basically been blown out. Their way of feeling, that what I call is their pain threshold, has been completely blown out and replaced with, again, a codependent coping mechanism. We accept everything and we're nice all the time and just let drama unfold as it does. And people are numb to something that is going to help them psychologically and physically survive. They don't even know they're walking into a lion's den.
Right.
So most people are in that caliber because of trauma, because of society, because of a lot of different factors. But I don't really know many people that utilize anxiety in a way that's healthy, that is actually tied to a circumstance. So I'm describing a lot of this now to kind of help make sense of some of these experiences emotionally. But I think being different from other people and them not respecting that difference, to get all the way back to you more specifically, that's something to be very careful of, is to have this kind of experience and then be told instead of respected, like, ooh, glad you picked up on that. Let's go. Respected for your attunement instead of told to get over it. You're making a big deal out of everything. I'm assuming demeaned in some way or told to, and then you have to escalate in order to, so you can talk a little bit more now about what makes sense about what I said and your situation specifically, or whatever came to mind.
Oh, so many things came to mind as you were talking. So thank you, first of all, for, saying that I've used anxiety in a healthy way, because I've worked really hard to get to that point. Like I know anxiety is here to stay with me, and I've been in therapy long enough and on medication long enough to understand that the way to live with it is to manage it. And so, I have been working a lot in intuition work. And I did, even though it was really painful after everything happened with Danny's family, I told Danny specifically, I was like, I would really appreciate it if from now on, when I confide in you, that I'm picking up on something that's not, that's off. I would like to be trusted when I say that. And I know Danny's still doing his own work in codependency, and he was so kind about it, but there was still that like inkling of magical thinking associated with intuition. So, he made the comment of like, of course, but like, let's not use it to make major life decisions. And I was like, I'm not using intuition to predict the future by any means. And so we had a conversation about like what intuition meant to me. And I used a couple of examples from, the brother and his girlfriend and a couple of other family members. And then, experiences that I had prior to our relationship. And I was like, this is how it's been for me. And so it's really nice to hear from somebody that it's actually a good thing, and that you would want me on your team, because I just, I didn't feel that way after everything was said and done. But one of the things that you said brought me back to, I listened to the podcast episode from our previous session. And at the end, when you mentioned realizing the futility of my attempts to, try to get Danny's family to see things from my perspective and to think about it logically, that's where that's definitely where I landed without even, you saying it directly to me, because after our session, I wrote a journal entry where I was kind of processing everything. And it was like, I realized, whoa, sorry.
It's a lot. No, it's okay. Take your time.
I realized that all of the rejection and abandonment that I've experienced in my own family, that was part of why I had like this armor that I keep referring to. And there was a point in between with Danny's family from the first attack to the second attack where I thought like maybe, I would be able to find some safety with Danny's family members. And I think that kind of blurred my vision a little bit. I wasn't necessarily as aware as I normally would be. And I went through, even during that time, Danny and I went through some really personal stuff where like I came out to my family as pansexual and gender fluid, and my dad completely rejected me. He said that therapy was a waste of money because clearly I had a mental illness. And that, God would judge me. He wasn't judging me, but that God would. And my sister, who kind of has a codependent relationship with our dad, she didn't respond to the email initially until our dad did. And then seeing that he was upset, she got on to me for upsetting him and told me I was a selfish person. And I needed to do my own work, which was so insulting to me because I feel like I am doing the work a lot to like not be a selfish person. So that really stung. And Danny's sister, this happened in between the first attack and the second attack of the girlfriend. And Danny's sister was really there for me.
Right.
When this happened. And I was like, okay, Danny's sister stepped up as our protector, like we talked about in the last episode or our last session. And because I felt safe with her, I was like, maybe I can try with other family members. And I did. I started to try and open myself up a little bit more because I decided I was ready. I didn't want to waste time with my own family members that weren't going to accept me for who I was and not try to change me or use me. And I felt like I had this brief moment with Danny's family where I had what I was looking for. And then this second attack came, and it was like the same cycle over again because I wouldn't conform to their expectations. I was rejected, and it just, I can't put it more eloquently than it sucked. and it devastated me.
Yeah, there is something more now leading up to this that sounds like, yes, that it would have been a double whammy. It was something that you haven't really talked about your family as much. And it sounds like your father, at least, is religious, comes from a very specific background. And in this time, that's the thing, is that there is this desire that to be accepted because of the movement of acceptance that's behind everything that you opened up to them about. However, it's met with, it's like a levee, there's a wall there. And that wall, even though you have a lot of support in this, that's the acceptance piece is a real, is a real conflict, is a real problem, right? So do you see how, in some ways, I think to talk about that for a moment, because again, he's, people with religious values have a lot of support behind them, but then they get to, a more progressive wall, and that's not accepted. So that's important because that's your family as well. Or is it not as much? Were you hoping that they would repair that instead of seeing what this really was for you? Meaning that feeling, again, blamed, rejected, told that you're the problem, instead of them not, having any way of asking a question or being curious or loving you for who you are. And even if they don't, there were a lot of other ways they could have handled it. Mm-hmm. So I think I want you to talk a little bit about how you experienced that first rejection or that first lack of acceptance, as far as you trying to be open, because we are working a little bit still in this place of in your mind, you're hoping for something. You're getting to places that are more evolved or more developed emotionally and more open. And you're wanting to share this, but then there is something on the other side of who you've decided to share this with that's hurtful.
Right. So when you say first, do you mean my family?
Yeah.
Okay.
With your family and being open about gender fluidity and all of that, that's something I'm wondering a little bit about what's happening in you when you choose to do that with somebody that might be challenging with or for.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, because one of the things that I've been working on in therapy is accepting that there can be superficial and shallow relationships. Uh-huh. and because I have a very difficult time doing that. And it's only because it feels like misaligned with my values, because my top value is authenticity.
Okay.
And kind of some sub values of that one are like loyalty and honesty and integrity. And I feel like a fraud if I'm not behaving in alignment with these things that I value so deeply. And it didn't feel real. I didn't feel like I was being accepted for who I was, because this, certain people were only getting fragment of who I really am.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't getting me as the whole person. And I was doing that to an extent to protect myself, but also because I wanted to protect the relationship.
Right.
And even though I am a person that has tried very hard to live independently, I really desired and craved acceptance from my own family, because there was so much neglect present. There was abandonment and rejection. Some of it came from places of just a person being not a great person. And other times it was because another person wasn't receiving or getting their needs met, so they couldn't meet mine. And there was, genuine sorrow for that, like neglect and abandonment. But then, sometimes there just wasn't even an acknowledgement
Right.
of having done something that hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more I've been in therapy, even though, we're talking about these kind of like superficial, shallow relationships that you can have with people, the more work I've done in therapy, the more that I've accepted myself for who I am. And I worked really hard on my self-worth and my self-love and my self-talk for it to not be so negative. And the more confident that I became and the more accepting I was of myself, the harder it was to maintain these relationships, like with my father and my sister, without this acknowledgement of like, this is who I really am. And I don't want you to be in my life if you're not going to accept that. And even though it devastated me, and I probably cried the hardest I had in a really long time when my dad and my sister reacted the way that they did, I knew that they would. I expected it. And so I think that's where the difference is with my family and Danny's family, is that I didn't expect Danny's family to react the way that they were, because even though I recognized codependency occurring, I didn't name it because I was still seeing Danny's family through Danny's lens.
Right.
And through Danny's lens, there wasn't this overarching issue of codependency. So I didn't see it either. A lot of my ideas got filtered through his lens, because I was working, like you said, in our previous session, I was working with individual relationships within the family.
Yeah. And I want to build on that a little bit, because the individual relationship is what I was thinking about before, when, to kind of consider, right, that you articulate that so well. You felt like a fraud because you played a role in order to have a relationship, protect the bond that is important. I mean, I'm not trying to say it's not, but the importance of those bonds need to be built on an authentic experience. But if I'm having a fantasy mom and a fantasy dad in my mind, because as children, we need to survive neglect, abandon, abuse, and all sorts of things, and we can't actually see our parents, there is something understood about how children use shame not to see the reality of their parents, because it would be too devastating. You have to still love them, or say that's an important bond, and it is, because they feed you, and regardless, if they're not good parents, it doesn't mean that you don't need them. So there is this emotional delusion that's used in a way to help us survive it. However, in the unveiling, you recognize that there was never any relationship there that was based on something that would be considered loving and reciprocal. There was just an acceptance of your values. This is what you want, and I will act a certain way with you so I don't jeopardize you, or whatever semblance of a relationship. I wish we had I know that there's different words for it, but it's not relatedness. It's, I guess, a situationship or whatever, but it's hard to start to, disillusionment is not an easy thing to do. Understanding something is not always something that's like, oh, wow, that was really cool. Like understanding something in science, or, something that you learn, that opens you up. This is something that is revealing about something you believed in for a long time. So I think that, to kind of pivot, right? It's not that we're social creatures. We do want what you want as far as love, acceptance, respect, and to be a whole person inside of, especially relationships that are more, obviously familial or intimate. Maybe not in every relationship you're expecting that, but these relationships, absolutely. So I do think that that's really what's driving, even though you were able to anticipate this, it still hurt. But then, you didn't have to stay there long, meaning because you had this next group that maybe you could try to find that. I mean, and I don't necessarily want to, I want to say this too, and because we're going to go into that, but I think it's really important not to stop, but be more, aware of self-worth, self-love, self-confidence does require, continuing to persevere and look out for those relationships that are going to be the ones that you feel you can be the most open in. And that is, I think, I'm hoping the new era that we're coming into, because of how much pain people are experiencing trying to, be accepted into relationships that are supposed to be loving and they're not, when they really look at the writing. So I kind of feel that that's exactly what the kind of, again, more of an experience of disillusionment. Like you went into at a certain level and then you started to recognize what was wrong with these relationships. Can I ask what you recognize about your desire to be in protected relationships or protecting relationships, or anything about the word protective, and what your associations are to it and how it's important for you in a relationship?
Oh, wow. You're good. Protection is a really big deal for me. Because I didn't feel like I ever had it. And that's why I'm so fiercely protective over myself, and why I'm such a strong advocate for myself, because nobody was for me. I have like a really distinct memory of my babysitter yelling at me in front of my mom, and my mom looking away and not meeting my eye when I turned to her for help. And I was really young. I think I was like 11. And that was a really formative experience for me, because I realized that if I wanted to be protected, that I would have to do it. No one was going to do it for me. And so that's why I seek out more intimate and protecting relationships, because it's a really big deal to me to make sure that the person that I am sharing space with is going to reciprocate that. I don't want I don't want to ever experience that again, where I'm being attacked and I'm being hurt, and I'm looking to, my family, Danny is my family, where I look to them for help and they've turned a blind eye. I don't want to experience that again.
And that makes a lot of sense, to feel as strongly as you do about a protective aspect to a relationship, because when you've experienced, and you said age 11, and it's a babysitter and you're getting pretty old at that point, actually, most likely that's happened in other ways before that. If she can't see that a babysitter's being over the top, or even pulling them aside or whatever, I can only imagine somebody even closer, she not being able to address the situation. But what this also, I think, helps you to understand is that there's a true vulnerability that you experience because of the lack of protection. That yes, you can compensate for in your personality, you can look for this in other people, but there's still a part of you that feels not taken care of, exposed, left to danger. And it's difficult to reconcile something like that, to make sense of it. But, as long as it stays, and this is and so I'm wondering what you think is like, I think as long as it stays a place that feels like you need someone to be able to do that, the other part of you that is really highly protective, maybe overly so, continues to, be the predominant. So you see how I'm saying it's kind of because this is still in a state that feels very vulnerable. The defense needs to stay heightened. And so there's a lack of, integration when we see that in some ways. And I'm wondering, what's coming to mind about this vulnerable part and how you take care of, not just against others, but whatever's coming to mind.
Two things came to mind. So when you were talking about the vulnerability and the response to that being that protection, I think of baby Lorna, like little kid Lorna, that protective side of me is being that parent or that sibling or that friend that I needed at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I made all of these promises to myself that we talked about in our last session, because I wanted to take care of baby Lorna.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I want somebody else to, it's hard for me to let anybody in to be able to do that. I'm very selective about who I let in, because when I kind of judge that based off of people, letting people in who love me that don't want to change me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that came to mind about it was going back to Danny's family. It was something that we had talked about last session too, where, after both attacks, there was these attempts being made to center Danny's brother's girlfriend after she had hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really hard because I needed genuine protection and I wasn't getting that. And I asked for it and I didn't get it. I even expressed to Danny's family, I know we talked about the reason for the second attack was because I didn't include the girlfriend in my garage sale. And I wrote an email out to all of the matriarchs in Danny's family. And I told them, I am genuinely afraid that if I host this, that this is going to escalate this person's behavior even more. And so it's kind of going back to the whole intuiting how a person might respond if I follow through with something, because I'm very aware. I'm hearing the leaves rustling. I don't see the bear yet, but I'm hearing the leaves rustling, and I'm trying to make them aware of that and open up and say, I'm afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I said. I said, I'm afraid. So I think the best thing that we can do is that I'll just host this garage sale on my own. I need to get rid of my things. I'll go through with it, but I think it's a good idea that you're not involved.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody responded to me. Nobody talked to me about my feelings when I opened up about it. And then they held their own garage sale in that valley and invited the girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't see, even when I confronted them about how much that hurt me, they didn't see that it was a big deal. And I said, I talked to Danny's mom about it, and I said, if two of your grandchildren are fighting over a toy dinosaur and one slaps the other because the other won't give it to them, are you going to give that dinosaur to your granddaughter, or are you going to put your granddaughter in timeout for slapping somebody?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Danny's mom said, well, I'd put her in timeout. And I'm like, okay, so do you not see that you gave this girlfriend the dinosaur? You took it from me and you gave it to her. You told her that she could do whatever she wanted to me and there'd be no consequences. And in fact, she'd actually get what she wanted, and you were going to reinforce that behavior, which leaves me vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I still, like, there was still just like vehement, like, denial of what I was saying.
Oh yeah. They're not going to be able to, and this is what I think it's not to, I get it, meaning that the anger and the denial and the defensiveness that comes out after you say, look, what's happening, writing on the wall. This means this, and you are responsible for that part of this. And that's left me, even if they love you, that's left me in a very specific situation. Instead of going, oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. This is why the whole world needs therapy.
I agree. Everyone can benefit from it.
But I also, this is kind of the reason of doing this is because I think this is something, again, there are a couple ways of always responding to something. And I think, but more specifically to you, that there is this fear in being vulnerable and this hope that you have to have that this time it's not going to happen, or this compliance and going along sometimes too, as far as you possibly can go before then you have to take it all back. There is an aspect to being this way, wanting to be protective of a vulnerable side of yourself, but also wanting equally to be accepted. That's what I'm trying to describe. That plays out in a very specific behavior where, well, if I want to be accepted, I'm going to have to do something, and so I have to appeal to them somehow. And then that not working out, because once you get in there, then you see that there is no protective layer. There was no, and then you start to try to make sense of something that you entered into for that acceptance that refuses to make sense, that are really only about accommodating the defensive need of the person at that time.
Right.
It's really just only what you can see on the top layer of the water. They won't go into taking responsibility for any of this, which I think is a wonderful thing, because we learn how to, even be better people and frustrate each other just a little bit, and again, here it is, you having an understanding of a person when they're ticked off, become enraged. You've already been attacked once. And here they're getting ticked off again. They're saying that they're getting upset. So you try to change the whole scenario so that doesn't happen, but then they go ahead and do it. Mm-hmm. In spite of, and I think that in some ways you can see it again as an offense and take it personally. But I think in some ways too, making sense of their behavior as, well, of course, this is how they work. And really starting to come to more terms with the desire for acceptance from others that don't necessarily have the capacity or show you that they do, even if they're trying to win you over, or trying to appeal to your protective side, or this side or that side, or understand where you're coming from behind closed doors. That's something that the reason why that keeps happening is because there's two conflicting desires in you. And we need to understand, not say, I said it, not eradicate the desire for acceptance, but really start to value that as an experience that you want to have, that it's not that's not hope or wish fulfillment, but a real experience that you're testing, or you're going into in the moment and more present. Mm-hmm. Where you're able to use, I think, your intuition and your, what's going on. And I think it's as easy as being able to recognize whether or not somebody can even ask you a question. Like when you talk, do people ask you a question afterwards or get interested in what you're saying? Mm-hmm. Just in that moment right there, you see if somebody is interested in empathizing or has the capacity, or if they're going to just tell you what they just, basically how it happened to them, or what it is that, that they wanted, or they withdraw. I mean, I really think there is something that we can do to help us get out of this cycle and into one that is more about the people within our group, that are supportive, people that aren't going to just challenge us every step of the way for something that we want. Otherwise, and I think this is a good place to start to think, what we find ourselves is there a reason why we keep walking towards a situation where rejection is going to be the outcome? Are we trying to, is there something in that where we feel, desperate? Is there a desperation? Is there a despair? Is there a sabotage, right? In that experience that I'm still somehow unconsciously motivated by? Or can I really with awareness, start to turn myself in a direction towards, because again, I would think that the more healthy mindset is to find a group of people that are accepting and loving, not necessarily super protective. I think you got that covered. But because that's part of the main defense. I think it's, in a place where you feel that, you can manage difference because the people that you're around are supportive. Yeah. Difference is much different than total opposition and threat.
Right.
So, tell me what you're thinking.
Definitely feel a little called out. I thought I had done all the work, that I wasn't acting in these self-sabotaging ways, but I really do see that as a pattern now. I think the reason that it hurt so much this time is because I couldn't ignore that anymore. And I really had to look into my defenses and why I've had these. And I probably wasn't ready, to hear it just at that time. I think it would have been a little too much, but I think now I've processed enough of the hurt to be in a better place mentally to be able to realize maybe I'm the problem too. I'm putting myself in these cycles that I've worked very hard not to do in my own family, but I'm doing it in other family systems because I'm just hoping one day I can have one, that I can have a family, because it's really, it's excruciatingly hard to accept that the people that brought you into this world don't love you unless you're in some way a projection of what they expect of you. And that's really hard.
It is.
And I've been subconsciously trying to seek that out. And I think I've been greedy about the amount of people that I've wanted that from. And I haven't been satisfied with the few that I've had, because I do have a circle. I do have a core group of people, but the thing is that it's really small. And that smallness is, it's heartbreaking to know that in my 32, almost 33 years of life, I've only met a handful of people that really give me what I want and what I need to feel fulfilled in my relationships. And that none of them are family, biologically. And I have my found family that I've been building, and I've been letting down my defenses over time with them.
Good.
And maybe it's just time to focus more on those relationships than seeking out these other ones. And I think subconsciously and a little consciously, I've been mourning.
Right.
Yeah. And I just wasn't there yet on my level of acceptance that this is the reality.
And it does take time. And there is a process of grief if you're really going to experience something and grow from it.
Mm-hmm.
That's acceptance is not, oh, okay, cool, and I let it go. And people are like, oh, therapist, why don't you just tell me to let it go? Well, I will once you get through every other part of the process. If you keep talking at some point, sure, but not in the beginning. Because there is an experience that's strengthening, that's fortifying, that's resiliency, that's something of emotional development that, I don't know if we have as much experience as maybe people that had hardship in the past. We have kind of a cush situation a lot of the times, and we're dealing with real psychological and emotional, I think a lack of progress, a lack of understanding. And there are a smaller group of people that really value their emotional experience, their relationships, dive deep into them, have high capacity for empathy, that do need to have an emotional experience, though, is at the same time as they are awakening to these aspects of those family members or of what they're looking for. But that's the point, is that you want to preserve your energy. And over time, as you start to give yourself back that love that you were trying to get from them, instead of looking for the next maybe person to do that with, that's something that starts to, I think, strengthen and fortify your ability to go ahead and go and take the risk to make new relationships. There's also an easiness to family relationships being so, oh, good. Okay, well, you've known me forever and we've been around the block, and there's an ease to it to come out of that space and to go into the world and find something you're interested in and get to know someone and develop that over time. Takes time, takes energy. It's not easy. But at the same time, I think that that's the kind of effort we in general, meaning anyone that says, wow, I find that I can have the found family, the friend family, but I need to give myself back this love that I've been allowing to spill out into, an idea of being able to fulfill a wish with people that continue to show me that they're not capable. Now I'm going to have to bring that in and have probably a more realistic idea about exploring new avenues for relationships, new adventures for relationships, new ways to have relationships. I don't even think, too, that family relationships are even that very creative. I mean, what do you, I'm thinking that, you can have more, I think more fun, let's just say, in what it is that you find interesting in a person and they're interested in the same things you are. Fulfillment wise, that's pretty cool. There's a higher potential for fulfillment there.
Yeah, it's actually, it's kind of crazy the way. So what you were talking about, it actually reminded me, I have this is a little bit more family background, but I actually have genuine found biological family. We found out a couple of years ago that my dad had another child in college, 2 months apart from my oldest sister.
Oh, wow.
He didn't know about it, about him. And when we met, because he and my sister are 21 years older than me. My dad had me later in life with his second wife, my mom. And I met his kids, and his kids are my age, and his youngest is actually was a person I met where I was like, oh my gosh, you're just like me.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I had ever seen myself reflected in somebody and it being reciprocated. And the reason that I'm crying right now is because I just thought to myself, what am I doing wasting time trying to repair these other relationships when I have a genuine person in front of me who's doing the same work that I'm doing. She is who I've been looking for, and I am that person to her too. And I've been so caught up in what I don't have that I just kind of forgot what I do have.
Well, but that is exactly the point, is that at some point you have the process, you've experienced the feeling, and then clarity, things start to come out of that space and go, oh, wow. And my life gets easier when I go that direction. That feels good. And you go towards good feeling and you start to walk away from the bad, and it gets further and further in the distance emotionally until you're like, wow, there's no desire to even enter that realm. I have left that territory, and you've moved forward.
It's really hard to take that first step, though, when bad has been your comfort, because it's all you've ever known.
That's right. It's startling, but when we do that, we actually create new pathways in our mind. And remember, this is where I think where the excitement comes from in challenging yourself behaviorally to do new things. It's like exposure therapy. You continue to put yourself in situations again and again and again that are negative. What about doing that in a positive way? You're going to build in the positive pathway, and that will be the desire. That experience, instead of, because at some point it does become, again, like habit. And that's really dangerous, to be comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. So you are more than welcome to continue. If you'd like, you can make that choice up yourself. But I think you've done amazing work, and I'm hopeful for you to continue on in your relationships in this way and understanding yourself. You're definitely on a path towards growth.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you again. And we'll see what you want to do. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome back. It is truly amazing to experience what is possible when someone is willing to open up in a safe space to look more closely at what is underneath it all. She had to be both vulnerable and trusting enough to allow me deeper entry into her emotional pain. And it was in that space, though, I could offer her new perspectives and insight without her feeling attacked or the need to withdraw. The two areas of insight our primary focus was on the power of fantasy, or more like the imagination, how that faculty of our mind, coupled with hope and wish fulfillment, can work in unison to blind us from the reality in front of us, or ever getting that which we really seek, which in this case was acceptance for Lorna from others, which is a completely healthy and natural desire. But not when we want it from people that could never give it to us before, or seek out new relationships that mimic those in the end, and yet stay completely frustrated or ever repeating that cycle. So upon integrating this understanding, we were able to make a step forward in taking responsibility for her desires to seek out people that align with her values and can serve as true friendships and relationships that are reciprocal and fulfilling in nature. That is an amazing realization that can bring so much to the human experience that many of us need to attempt, I think, at a deeper level. So hopefully this journey has helped you, and you too will be able to take the step. Hope to see you next time. Thank you very much.